option. It says it's happening, so that should work. So yeah, welcome to class. It is Monday. I feel like whenever we meet on Monday, I'm always a little disoriented because it feels like a very long time between when we see each other. I know in reality it's not, but a lot of things happen between class on Thursday and class today. Does anybody have any news they want to share? Anything interesting happen over the weekend? Stories to tell? I have a story, but maybe I'll let you guys go first. Any stories? Chat, you guys got any stories? No stories? I'll tell my story. So I got vaccinated. I got my first shot yesterday. And, you know, I'll be honest, it's sort of horrible. I'm a little bit sensitive when it comes to shots. You know, it's like, it's not even the needle really. It's more just the shot itself. It's like my arm hurts, my body hurts. Just yesterday kind of sucked. I got the shot and then I got on the train to ride home and I just felt like a zombie or something. I was just like, I need to get home and lie down, you know? So if you guys, I don't know, maybe some of you have already gotten shots, but if you get the vaccine in the future, give yourself like a day, you know, maybe some of you are stronger than I am, I don't know, but if you're sensitive like me, give yourself a day. I mean, even today, why did I forget my chargers? Because like my arm is killing me picking up my computer and I just forgot my charger because I was thinking about other things. So yeah, it is like a whole body experience, you know. This is something that, at least in my case, it is dominating, you know, the last 24 hours of my life. It doesn't mean it will continue to dominate my life, but for the last 24 hours, I felt kind of messed up. But that being said, you know, once I get my second shot, then I'll be bulletproof, right? Isn't that what they promised? No, I'll still have to be careful, but I will also have a greater peace of mind, I suppose. I was reading about vaccination passports. Have you guys heard this term before? I'd never really heard of it, but it basically, there's talk, you know, among the global leaders, like to get some sort of passport system where it's like, if you're vaccinated, then maybe you can travel a little more easily, which was music to my ears. So I would love to find something like that. Let's see. Oh, we got some chat. We got Edna in Italy erupted. Oh, I didn't know that. Very interesting. Crazy. And the damage wasn't too bad though. Yeah, so I guess there was a volcanic eruption I didn't hear about. I guess I don't think I read the news this morning, so perhaps it just happened. We can tune in and find out. In the more directly related topics for our class, I sent you guys an email yesterday morning, right? Did I send you an email? You guys get an email from me? Email? What was in the email? Midterm. Yeah, so the review sheet, I attached it to the email, so you should have many ways you could download this. As you can see, I got it from Moodle also. I feel very smart for putting it in a bunch of places, so, you know, if you can't find it and you email me, I'll know that you really didn't look anywhere, because it's everywhere, right? It's in your emails, it's in the announcements, it's on Moodle. Just look somewhere and you'll find it. If you have ever taken a class with me, you'll kind of know the drill. This is how I do exams. I give you a one page review sheet with information about the exam at the top. So it'll be in class on Thursday the 4th, which is not this week, it's the following week. But that being said, it's a week and a half away, right? So not too far away, not too early to start studying, right? All of these are terms I pulled from the slides in some capacity. Maybe, you know, I tried to keep the order straight for each column. So there are English terms, Sanskrit terms, important people and gods, lists of lists, and then some books and stories. I tried to keep them generally in the order that we covered them, but I can't promise that that's 100% true. And yeah, so some of these will be really straightforward and easy. The Buddha, you probably know who he is by now. You probably already knew who he was before class started, but maybe you have a little more knowledge about who the Buddha is, right? And so some of these are really big categories, right? We've been reading the life story of the Buddha. We finished it for today, right? Congratulations, finishing a book. Isn't it always exciting to finish a book? And so Yeah, so some of them are more general, some are more specific, right? So like a lay person, you might not even know what a lay person is yet because we haven't covered them yet. The ones at the very bottom will be the least familiar to you because like I said, I try to keep it chronological. So lay person, you might not know. Impermanence, if you don't know that one, we'll cover it today. Monks and nuns, stupa, final enlightenment, Gautami, Angulimala, those are all new. Rahula, we'll talk about him today. But these you should pretty much all know. This language of 3 poisons, I don't know if we used that before, but that's kind of what this list of 3 negative emotions are called. And yeah, the rhinoceros horn sutra, we haven't read that yet either. So there are a few little things that we still need to go over, but most of this should be pretty familiar to you by now. Logistics are weird because some people are in class, some people are not. The goal is to get everybody taking the exam at the same time, right? Whether you're home or not home. I ask that people who are registered in person take the exam in person, and those who are registered fully remote take the exam fully remote. There are a few reasons for that. The simplest one is if we are mostly in the same room and weird things happen and your computer has a problem and you can't do this, you can't do that, we can figure it out together. You know, like I had a computer problem today. I forgot my charger, right? You forget your charger, we can figure it out together. I guess at home you would not forget your charger usually, unless you lost it somewhere. But you see what my point is, right? If you are registered in person, I want you to come. Theoretically, that's what I'm supposed to say for every class, but as I've said, I'm pretty relaxed about that. This is the one time I'm not relaxed about it because it's an exam, right? And we gotta take exams seriously. People at home, again, fully remote registered students, please take it at home during the class time. It's gonna be through Moodle, so you'll log in, the clock will start. I don't know if you've done this before, but I'll just do the kind of regular exam through Moodle. Clock will start, limited amount of time. There will be 2 sections. One is quotation explanations, where I'll give you quotations from the slides, almost 100% from the slides. I'm not gonna say 100%, let's say 95%. I don't want to bind to myself if there's like a really good quotation that I forgot to put on a slide, but in general, straight from the slides. Does that mean I expect you to like memorize every quotation on the slides? Of course not, right? What I expect you to do is to know this story, right? And so if I give you a quotation about the Buddha touching the earth and somebody challenging him, who would that somebody be? Mara, yeah. And the only way you'll know that if you know the story, right? It'll be open book. So if you forget, you can turn to that chapter, but it'll also be timed. And so if you just kind of know it, that is in your favor. You'll have more time to do the other parts of the exam. If you don't know it, you have to look everyone up, then you can do that, but you won't have time to answer every question. So it'll be time management. It'll be how well do you know the readings? How well do you know the class materials? And then finally, short essays, which will be a lot like the discussion questions we have in class, right? Where I give you discussion questions. You guys are theoretically discussing these questions with each other. Now is the time to shine. If you have been doing it, you'll do great. If you haven't been doing it, you won't do great, right? And so that's sort of how college works, right? If you do the work, you will do fine. I promise that is how I will design this exam. You don't do the work, then I'm, supposed to tell you do the work, right? And this is how I tell you. So I think that's it. Any questions? That was a lot of things to talk about, but I promise it's actually not too confusing. How's that sound? Any questions off the bat? Any specific terms you want to go over right now? Like I said, the ones at the bottom we haven't covered yet, so let's hold off for later on those. But yeah, if there's anything in the list you want to go over, if you already started looking at this and you can't figure something out, I'm happy to talk about it. Oh, was I echoing? So that would, people are still joining. Well, that's fine. But next class, we can do this a little more thoroughly. I guess actually the exam's not till a week from next class. So try to look at it by next class. If you have any questions, we can go over it. If you don't want to, we don't have to. It's for you, right? It's basically your review time. We'll do it at the beginning of class to reward those who actually show up on time. Again, this class starts at 7:45. And I think you guys know that. So, and then Tuesday, we can do it again too. So anyways, we're getting prepared in advance, but I want to give you time to study and, organize your life, that sort of thing. So any questions off the bat? Terms, processes, is that all very clear? Okay. Chat, you guys got any questions? You guys all good? Okay, well, why don't we get started? So last time, Four Noble Truths, this is like the core philosophical teaching of Buddhism. There are many others, so I don't mean to say this is the only one by any means, but this is a really important one, let's just say. There's a lot of diversity, a lot of different sects and schools of Buddhism, lots of contradictions even. So that's one thing we kind of saw when we talked about the blind man and the elephant, right? There are all these different pieces of Buddhism. When we started talking about the life story of the Buddha, there are many sides to the Buddha, right? He was a god, he was a human, he was a prince, he was the cosmos, he's a bodhisattva, he's all these things wrapped up into one. And so the different schools of Buddhism emphasize different things, but they all pretty much agree that this is important. And they also pretty much agree that the life story of the Buddha is important, right? So that's why we've started with the life story of the Buddha, and that's why we're focusing on the Four Noble Truths, because this is really like the core mainstream Buddhist teachings. And then we'll see some divergences as the semester goes on, really in the next part of the semester. Okay, so this is just my kind of recap. I had to put my thinking cap on and think about what is the most important teaching, what are the Four Noble Truths really about, right? And it seems sort of obvious. Suffering, causes of suffering, the end of suffering, and then there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. And that's a good way to remember it. People compare it to a doctor's diagnosis. I went and got my shot yesterday, and the folks who were running the clinic were talking to me, and they're like, hey, do you have any symptoms? Do you have any problems? How's it going, right? So step number one is you identify the problem. Fortunately, I don't have any symptoms or anything. And so then number two is, let's say I do have a fever. They have to think, all right, does this guy have COVID? Does he have the flu? Does he have something else, right? And so these are the same sorts of questions that the Buddha is going through, just with suffering in general, right? Your general malaise, your general dissatisfaction. And some people translate this word as like dissatisfaction, or I don't know. It's a pretty loose term. Some people don't translate it, they just call it dukkha. I use suffering because it's sort of a classical way of translating it. I think it does cover what we usually call suffering. I think suffering is a weird word. We don't usually think about the suffering of our lives, right? Generally, you don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm suffering today, right? So there's some space to sort of play with it, redefine it. So in any case, this is one way to think about it. It's just like a logical problem-solving mechanism, right? You have a problem, you think about the cause of the problem, you think about, is it possible to solve this problem? Because sometimes the answer to that is no. And then you think about, what is the path that takes me there, right? So that's the logical setup. Another way to think about it too, though, and this is what I came up with as I was preparing for class, all things are composed of parts, including ourselves, and will therefore decay into parts. And that might not feel like a particularly profound realization. But the second part is that there are these negative emotions that then obscure this understanding that things are composed of parts and will inevitably decay into parts. So there is a vocab word on the review sheet that talks about this process of things decomposing into parts. What is that review sheet word? What word am I looking for here? I'll give you a hint. It's in the English terms column. It is impermanence, right? You guys see the connection there? We talked about this last time, how things can't stay forever. And I went as far as to say this is a fact of life. This is a fact. Unfortunately, it is. And unfortunately, also, we don't generally live our lives with that understanding. That's setting you up for difficulty right there. This is the tension that the Buddha is trying to bring our attention to, right? Is that on the one hand, if you analyze the world around you, you know that everything will come to an end, right? Even this life, all the things we love, all of it will stop. Eventually, it has to. It can't stay forever. And yet, on the other hand, we don't live our lives in accordance with that truth, right? We don't generally, maybe you guys are smarter than I am, but we don't generally look at things that way, right? And there are reasons for that, right? You lose some things. You know, maybe you wouldn't love as openly or as deeply, right? Maybe you wouldn't be as attached to the people around you. You wouldn't be as passionate about your life. You might kind of fall into nihilism. That's not on the review sheet, but it's a good word. You guys know this word? I know this is a very faint chalkboard, so you probably can't even see that very clearly, but nihilism, I'll write it in the chat too, for those who are in the chat. Have you heard this word before? What is nihilism?
Kind of falling into the belief that nothing matters and everything is meaningless.
Yeah, you guys ever feel that way? It's pretty easy to fall into nihilism, in fact. And it's pretty easy to look at Buddhism and think they're just a bunch of nihilists. But the Buddhists would deny that. The Buddhists would deny that. And we'll get into this more later. But I bring it up now because we could say sort of an extreme interpretation of this realization leads to nihilism, right? Everything's just made out of parts. It's all just science. It's all just the cold universe. And we're a little speck on a planet that's rocketing through space, right? Who even cares? What do I matter? What am I going to do for the universe, right? You zoom out enough, doesn't even matter. And indeed, there's some truth to that, right? I'm not even here to tell you that that's not true. There is some truth to that. But I would also argue that's only one side of the equation, right? That's only one way of looking at the world. And in some ways, what the Four Noble Truths is asking you to do is to develop different tools, right? This is one tool. We could call it a nihilistic tool to sort of take things apart. But another tool is to put them back together again. So these are the two tools that derive from these Four Noble Truths. Any questions about this initial slide? Again, these are the big ideas of the Four Noble Truths. We haven't gone through every detail of them yet, and we will proceed into some of the details in a moment. But I just wanted to give the overview. Any questions about this? Things are composed of parts. They're impermanent. They decay into parts. And these negative emotions cause us to miss that truth. We talked about this last time. I think if we look at it with new eyes, maybe we'll see some more of this sort of language of being composed of parts. These 5 factors of individuality. We went over those last time. They are on the review sheet. We didn't spend too much time on them. I frankly don't love this translation that Keon gives, 5 Factors of Individuality. I generally like the book, which is why I sign it, but he's kind of creative with his translations, let's say, to the point where it's like, what are you even talking about, bro? And, you know, 5 Factors of Individuality, how many syllables is that? That's like a ton of syllables. So what are these things? They are the parts, right? They're the parts that we're made out of. Form, what part is form talking about? Do you guys have a form?
Our body.
It's your body. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of us kind of stop there. It's like, oh, this is who I am. You want to see a picture of me? Here I am, right? My hair looks good today. My arm hurts, right? Or whatever, right? And so this is sort of where our self-identity stops for many people, the body. But of course, the Buddhists have more than that. Feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. I think we talked about all this, didn't we? I don't expect you to know all the depths and details of all this sort of thing, but I want the takeaway to be that we are composed of parts, right? As opposed to thinking I am some very solid bill, like there's some sort of solid bill mayonnaise that just covers me and unites me together, right? What are we? Is we are a composite of these 5 different parts. That's the main takeaway here. And again,
Professor?
Yes.
So like if we were given that on the exam, you would want us to kind of summarize the whole thing as like, this is what makes us up, or would you kind of ask us to define each of the individual parts of that 5?
Yeah, so Sam's thinking about the exam now. Good, I should threaten you with exams more. I'll get more questions like this. So yeah, what is the takeaway here? I'm not going to ask you what is a mental formation. I'm not going to do that. I'll promise you that now. But I do want you to know that there's a body and a mind, and that the Buddhists think actually there are 4 parts to your mind, right? One is the process of perceiving the world around you, your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, like the mental aspects of your sense perceptions, right? And then there are also kind of the labels you attach to those perceptions. Again, it gets into very sort of detailed epistemological, philosophical topics. You don't have to know that stuff, right? We didn't read about it. We didn't go into a lot of detail about it. It is in Kyon. So that would be maybe my first advice to you. If you feel a little shaky on these things, look them up in the slides, look them up in Kyon. Here's the page for the suffering conversation. And I'm pretty sure his explanation of these 5 factors come right after that. So that's a good place to look. But no, I'm not going to quiz you like what is a mental formation, because that doesn't feel very productive to me. So what do I want you to know? Again, is what I've told you from the top of the class, right? Is that we are composed of parts. What are these parts? Well, they are these 5 things. And in fact, this term, you know, again, there are problems with translation. If you ever get deeper into Buddhist studies, you'll realize this very quickly. I call them the aggregates. Some people call them the heaps. There's a sense like they are fuel, like they're fuel for a fire, right? They're bundles of fuel. Why are they fuel? Is because these are the things that light on fire. And we talked about fire imagery before, haven't we? Did we talk about fire imagery for enlightenment? Maybe we didn't quite get that far. It's in a slide, but I don't think we got that far in this section. And so what does it mean for them to be on fire? These are the things that cause us suffering, right? These are the things that, because we perceive, you know, this book as a book that my teacher wrote, and I spent so much time reading it, and I spent some money on it, and I wrote all over, and there's so many ideas in this. You know, I have an attachment to this book, right? I don't see this as some sort of objective. I have no objective eyes. I have no view from nowhere, right? It's dripping with all of these other details. And so again, the nihilist would say, but those are all false, right? From an ultimate point of view. So that is one direction you can take it in. So anyways, you don't have to know all the details of this. I just want you to understand that this is a category. And what does this category serve to do? What are these 5 factors? Why do they matter?
Make up the components of our individuality.
Yeah, they are what we are made of, right? That's the takeaway, Sam. Does that make sense? Are you still around, Sam?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, how's that sound? Is that good?
Yeah, it's good.
That's good. All right, good. So arising, I think we started to get into this last time. Again, we're picking up where we left off, as we usually do in this class. Again, now that you're thinking you have an exam on this, maybe you'll have more questions for me. I don't know. What is arising? What is it talking about? This is the origins. This is the reason for our suffering, right? Step number 1, this is noticing that we suffer, noticing how it manifests. Step number 2 is thinking about where does it come from, right? What are the origins? Where do these things arise from? So that's this language of arising. And the Buddha narrows it down to this, tanha, this craving, right? But we talked about desires last time. Does this simply mean desire? Are all desires this tanha, this craving? Do all desires lead to suffering? Common misconception. A common misconception is that, yes, all desire is bad. But is that what the Buddha discovered in his adventures? It's not what he discovered. What did the Buddha discover? What did the Buddha discover in his adventures? And so again, it might feel like this is sort of a historical account, but of course it is not, right? This is basically just Buddhist teachings put in a narrative form. And that again is why we focus on them. And now we can sort of unpack them and put them in the context of his philosophical doctrines. The Buddha lived a very comfortable life, remember? He was a prince. He had all the comfortable things. He probably didn't even get any shots in the arm. He just felt good all the time, right? Then he left home. He led the opposite life. And he even experimented with this. He's like, maybe all desires are bad, right? But are all desires bad? No. So what was that thing that he figured out called? Chat, can you save us? Nothing? Brendan? The middle way. Good. All right, I'm starting to get nervous for you guys on this exam. Brendan's bailing us out, but these are important details that we've covered pretty thoroughly, to be honest, right? We read this entire book. We spent a lot of time on it. You know, we went through very slowly. And the reason for that, again, is to get them in your noggins, get them in your 5 factors of individuality, right? So these are things that you know, right? And so middle way needs to be like there. If it's not on the tip of your tongue, you're not going to do well on this exam. You're going to run out of time. So these are the sorts of things you need to know. The middle way is definitely one of them. And again, it comes into this philosophical stuff. Not all desires are bad. Some desires are bad. Some desires cause trouble. Others don't. What's the difference between them? How do we decide? How do we determine what's a good and a bad desire? This is an important life skill, in fact. Well, what does he say right here? Thirst for sensual pleasure, thirst for existence, thirst for non-existence. There's this sense of thirst, right? Which has actually become sort of a colloquial term that people use on the internet, right? Thirst trap. What would the Buddha say about a thirst trap? Probably say, look out for those thirst traps, right? Avoid them at all costs because they're traps. Maybe a better way of putting this is, what is a wholesome desire? As opposed to one of these unwholesome ones. What does that sound like?
People like wanting to do well in school.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great desire, right? Now, if you only want to do well in school when I scare you with exams, it's not as good. I guess it's still pretty good, but but yes, wanting to do well in school is a wonderful desire. Yeah, and actually, this is one that gets people in trouble. I could go on a tangent about that, but I won't. But yes, wanting to go, you know, because wanting to learn, right? It's not just like getting your piece of paper that you can show everybody so you can get a good job, so you can get a good future, so you can make a lot of money, so you can survive in this horrible economy that's currently crashing and burning all around us. I mean, that's a concern too. But learning, thirst for learning is nice too. No, I understand the pressures of grades. I don't mean to make fun of you. That's sort of impolite of me. So in any case, how's this sound? These unwholesome desires cause suffering for us. Wholesome desires don't. I had some videos about it. There's no time to watch them though. This is something I don't think we got to yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. Interdependent origination. Did we get to this yet? Does that ring a bell for anybody? No? Okay. And so what is this talking about? This is, again, kind of what we started off with, right? Is this recognition that everything is composed of parts, but rather than taking it apart in this sort of nihilistic fashion, this is building it up, right? It's thinking about, where do things come from, right? Let's say I have a wholesome desire of wanting to do well in this class. I can think, okay, this class is composed of parts. You guys agree with me? All I have to do is look at the syllabus and you'll see that. But it's, you know, actually composed of many parts and many different components. And so first of all, by recognizing that, we can kind of learn to manipulate the system. We can think, all right, there are all these slides with page numbers on them. I can read every detail of every book. And actually, there still is time to do that. I don't give you a lot of reading in this class. You could probably read this in a day. Some of the other reading, you could probably do all the reading that I've studied so far in like 2 or 3 days if you took it seriously. So there is time. If you've done 0 reading, there still is time. It's not too late, folks. But that being said, even if I'm incapable, I don't have time to do all the reading, I can go to the slides, right? And see the slides. If I don't understand something like interdependent origination, I can then go to Kyon, page 51, find the thing that I'm looking for, right? Become a bit more familiar with it, and then understand this little piece, this little nugget that composes all the knowledge in this class, right? I'm stretching the metaphor a little bit, but you know, you could think about your own existence, right? You were once a glimmer in your mother and father's eye. You know, I use that very creatively. Then you were born, right? You can think about all of your different ancestors that came together to create you. Without them and their efforts, you would not be here, right? And to think about yourself as part of this larger network. You know, these masks remind us that we breathe the same air. These are things we don't always think about, but we are all part of the same ecosystem, or whatever you want to call it. Stratosphere, atmosphere, that's probably the one. Atmosphere in this room, right? We're sharing the same air. We're occupying the same space. I was thinking about this last night. I'm alone in my apartment with my arm hurting. But then I hear my neighbors banging upstairs. I hear my neighbor on the side talking to somebody, whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm surrounded by people. Even though I feel like, you know, my arm hurts and I feel very sad for myself, I'm also surrounded by all these people, right? So Interdependent origination is seeing all the different pieces coming together around us. And it is often not obvious, right? This is something you sort of have to think about. And it's also the opposite of nihilism, right? You could think, oh, this class is just composed of a bunch of parts, not even real. Grades aren't even real. It's all just a thing on a piece of paper. And then I would counter that by saying, yes, it's not even real, but it will also help you get a job and make some money and survive in this economy that's crashing all around us and so forth, right? So this is the game, right? You take things apart, you build them back up. It's the two sides of this realization that the Buddha had. As a result, we have suffering, impermanence, and the absence of a fundamental self. I gave you two of these. I left one of them out. I thought the self thing would probably just confuse you. So that's more of a response to Hindu ideas that are popular at the time. And a lot of people misinterpret this to think that they don't exist. And I don't want to give you the nihilistic impression that you don't exist, because you do exist. You're just composed of parts, but you still exist. Don't worry. Don't call anybody and say your teacher told you don't exist, because you do exist. But yeah, so why does existence have this mark of suffering? Can anybody put this in their own words? Why does this interdependent origination lead to suffering? What do those have to do with each other?
Like that, like philosophical quote about life is pain.
Mm-hmm.
The hardships that will happen when you're alive.
That is definitely the takeaway, right? What does that have to do with this whole thing about stuff being composed of parts and coming together as a result of different causes and conditions bringing them together? And of course, for Buddhists, karma too. We don't have to necessarily talk about that too much. But yeah, what is this idea that life is pain? What does that have to do with this other conversation of parts and pieces and so forth?
It would mean like your existence, parts of your life will be harder than other parts. It's more difficult to get through.
That's true. Yeah. If we have an expectation that life will be one way for our whole lives, right? There's some people who are like this. Have you guys ever met someone who eats the same thing for lunch every day? Maybe some of you guys do that. And when they don't have that same thing for lunch, then it's all of a sudden very surprising. I flirt with this lifestyle. I understand it, right? It's simpler. You can sort of simplify things by just doing the same thing over and over again. You don't have to think about it. You shop and buy the same thing every time. You make the same thing every morning. I eat a very similar breakfast almost every morning because I'm tired and I don't want to think about it. But at the same time, it's kind of amazing to spice it up. You go traveling, you don't have access to your familiar things, right? And then in some ways, that's sort of the point of traveling. It's something I frankly miss about traveling, is we get to change it a little bit, right? We get to sort of see these other sides. So coming back to Sydney's initial point, if you expect life to be the same every day, all day, you will be disappointed, right? Maybe you'll be right like 99 days out of 100, but that one day you'll forget your charger for your computer or something like that. And all of a sudden you gotta think on your feet, right? You gotta adapt. I could have thrown my hands in the air and said, class is over. We can't do it, right? I forgot my charger. But of course, I just had to think about all the parts and pieces coming together. So anyways, this is the same realization that I pointed out at the top of class. Things are made out of parts. When we don't see them as such, we can be perturbed by this, right? I use some silly examples, but they're very important ones that are also surprising to us too. Okay, questions about this? I'm going a little bit quickly, just in the interest of moving through all the material. We still have a lot of time though. I want to give you guys a chance to talk, just because this is still, we're in the kind of review part. I want to turn it over to you. The Buddha is still reaching the final stage of his story. Cessation, you guys know what cease means, right? Cease and desist, stop, cessation. So this is the end of suffering. And I think I brought up Justin Bieber last time about believing in nirvana. I forget even what the song is. Is it Holy? He has a relatively recent song where he says he doesn't believe in nirvana. And actually, I kind of like that song because, well, maybe not the song, but I like that line. I like that idea because you kind of have to believe in nirvana. I was thinking about that over the weekend, how this is not something you can really find from your own experience. I don't know if you will ever find a moment in your life that is completely free and safe from suffering. Again, that's one realization that the Buddha had, right? Is that even if you're not suffering right now, you could be, right? You guys are comfortably sitting in your chairs, but if I force you to sit in those chairs for 10 hours, your butt will start to hurt, right? If I force you to sit in those chairs for 10 days, you will have sores. It will be horrible, right? And so even like seemingly comfortable things can also lead to big, big problems, right? And it's sort of a horrible diagnosis, and it leads itself to nihilism. And so how do you combat this nihilism is use your imagination, right? And I know belief often doesn't have a place in these discussions about the nature of reality, but this is religion class, right, after all. And that's really what's required here. You have to imagine, what would it be like to be free of suffering? And it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. I'm sure you guys can come up with moments where it's like, oh yeah, I was pretty happy at that time. Those were simpler days before I knew I had this exam coming up. No, I put too much weight to the exam. It won't be that bad. But you do have to kind of make it up, right? And again, what's the point of this story? All of these like fantastic tales of the Buddha, all of his achievements, how he's such a great guy. It's creating that space for you, right? It's creating that narrative idea for you to perhaps even aspire toward it, right? A friend of mine is a pastor. He's also a professor here. That's how I know him. And I saw on Facebook he was preaching because it's Lent, I guess. Lent is starting. Is that right? Is that accurate? Yeah, I mean, it goes to show. I'm a religious studies professor, but I really am very, very specialized in the more Eastern side of things. But yeah, Lent is beginning, you know, and people are sort of following in Jesus's footsteps. And there's a similar process there. You imagine Jesus to be this great figure, very sacrificial, very giving, very caring, very compassionate, very brave, right? Willing to go through all this pain. I'm complaining about the shot I got in the arm, right? Look what's happening to him, right? And he kind of, he was up for it. He didn't run away, right? He didn't cry. He didn't beg. You know, this is, again, a moment of bravery. It's creating a figure that you can follow, right? Just like Superman in the movies as well, right? These figures we create, we follow, we keep them. And this is a figure that has passed beyond suffering. So utter cessation of that craving. Again, there's this cause and effect language, right? If craving is the problem, this tanha, these negative desires, those are the problem, cut them off, right? Problem solved. Very simple. But it's easier said than done. And you got to sort of figure out what are the negative desires. But that's how it's presented here. Cutting off that craving, those negative desires, and as a result, no longer suffering. Again, it's a pretty good plan, but sort of hard to put into practice. Questions so far? Chat, you guys good? Four Noble Truths? Okay, the last one is the Eightfold Path. Maybe you've heard of this before. If you're wondering, do you have to memorize the Eightfold Path? The answer is no, you don't. And in fact, I've already said this, but it's open book, it's open note. You can write down the Eightfold Path and have it in front of you when you take the exam, if you like. That would also be fine. So, you know, as you can probably guess, I'm not going to ask you what are the 8 folds of the path, the 8 branches of the Eightfold Path. What I want you to know is that this is a middle way approach, right? Again, it's finding a middle way in these 8 aspects of your life. If one of the Buddha's big realizations was the middle way, and that was the path that led him to enlightenment, it makes sense that he would recommend that to us as well. So what are the 8 things? Well, here they are listed out for you. I've kind of organized them for you in terms of wisdom, morality, meditation. Kyon does the same thing. I think that's a good way to think about it. It's harder to remember 8 things. It's pretty easy to remember 3 things. So if you need to memorize stuff, go for the 3. Understanding, resolve, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, meditation. Those are the 8. And, you know, they're not self-explanatory, right? So what would mindfulness look like? What would meditation look like? What's the difference between those 2? What's the difference between action and livelihood? Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, right? Speech, maybe that is, maybe it's not, I don't know. But, you know, speaking kindly to people, don't speak too harshly, don't speak too much, don't speak too little, right? Do it in the right way, do it in the middle way. What about livelihood? What does livelihood mean? Maybe that's worth going into some detail about. We could go through more of these, but I think livelihood is relevant for your guys' lives. What is livelihood talking about? Well, I guess first of all, what does that English word mean, livelihood?
Kind of like your life and your purpose in it.
Mm-hmm. It even has life in it. Yeah. So your life, your purpose, a lot of the time it means your job. And we often conflate all of those things. That's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way it's presented here. Your job, right? So what would a good job be for the Buddhists? Do you think being a fisherman would be a good job according to the Buddhists? You get to sit by the dock and meditate.
No,
Why not, Jocelyn?
because it comes at the like expense of the other fish.
Yeah. Again, if I'm just thinking about money and my livelihood and me, right, this very sort of self-centered approach to the world, I might not think about the fish. But Jocelyn is very other-minded, very compassionate and caring about those fish. And so she was thinking, to be a fisherman, you got to kill fish. And Buddhists don't like killing fish. Why don't Buddhists like killing fish?
It's like benefiting yourself at the expense of another, and that's very much the opposite of everything.
Yeah. They're beings. Remember karma tales, reincarnation? We started with this at the very beginning of the semester. If your job is to kill things, the Buddhists are going to say, don't do that job. And in fact, finding a good livelihood is sort of hard, right? I recognize the sort of, the arrogance in saying this, but things like being a teacher is not so bad. You know, you make a little bit of money, you help out some people, you get to live your life, right? But actually to be a business person, and this is the way it's presented in sort of the old books. Obviously it's sort of a different world we live in now, but there's a sense you gotta like trick people and you gotta sort of talk two different ways, right? Pretend like you have a good product when it's actually a crappy product. And frankly, I'm terrible at that sort of thing. I remember a friend of mine had these Tibetan language dictionaries before iPhones were really a thing. It was like these pocket digital dictionaries you could take around, and they weren't really available in the United States. And, you know, I brought some back with me. He asked me to sell them for him. I was so bad at it. I was just like, hey, anybody want these dictionaries? They're actually not that useful, but they're kind of good. You know, they got some words in them. But then the iPhone came and you don't need those sorts of things anymore. It's just one app among many. So anyways, right livelihood. It just goes to show you got to sort of think about these things, right? What are the different pieces? What are the different activities you'll be doing in this livelihood? What are you going to do with the money that you get? How are you going to get it? All these sorts of things come together in these equations. And as you can see, this is not like a 10 commandments, right? There is something sort of like that. There's something called the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues, but this is a little looser than that, right? It's basically like, here are 8 things you should think about in your life. You figure it out. Do it well though, right? Because will decide whether you suffer or whether you don't. And that, my friends, is the Eightfold Path. Do you guys have any questions? I know philosophically it's more sophisticated, right? It's much easier to just read stories and talk about them. And that's why we read stories and talk about them. But hopefully you can see the connections, right? Particularly things like the middle way. This is a story about a middle way. Right? That's if you look at the life of the Buddha, extreme indulgence, extreme discipline, middle way, enlightenment, right? That's the story in just a few sentences. I guess those weren't really sentences. And then that, of course, leads into these more philosophical ideas. Now, it is your turn. So death, particularly in Japan, I'm not an expert of Japanese Buddhism, but I did take some graduate courses on Japanese Buddhism. My understanding is that Buddhists tend to dominate end-of-life rituals, right? There's sort of an interesting religious landscape. There's Shinto. There's also kind of international ideas about various different religions that are available. But the Buddhists really are the specialists of death, to the point where there's this sort of hilarious video that I will show you, assuming that it works. Can I optimize for video clip? I can. Yeah.
I call it saving money by customizing car insurance with Liberty Mutual.
What is this?
限に微絶心に無識相法未速報無限界内し無意識界無知薬無度異無所生尊明尊具が根順門秘税人妖怪略根不思議昨今人間の質っていうのが右肩下がりにずっと下がっているような今の時代ですがその根本は一体何が変わってしまったかっていうことこの先多分今の20歳の子ならこの先
So what's going on with this robot here? Can you tell? I know there's no like voiceover, but if you're able to read the subtitles, you should have a sense. So what is, I guess, first of all, have you heard of Pepper the robot before? So this is like a standard AI system called Pepper. So this robot was not invented from nothing, right? This is kind of a widespread, widely known robot. But that being said, this robot was adapted for a specific purpose. So what is this robot doing here? Could you tell? Jocelyn?
From like what I can gather, he's doing like the death ceremonies is a weird way to put it, but like kind of passing ceremonies, passing prayers.
Yeah, so death ceremonies is not usually what we call it. What do we usually call a death ceremony? Funeral, yeah, exactly. But I liked death ceremony because you're actually thinking about this as a moment of death, right? And of course, that was the header for the slide. So maybe I sort of led you into that one. So he's doing funeral ceremonies, exactly. He's chanting scriptures. So we actually have not read, we read any scriptures? Not really, right? At the beginning of the semester, we read a section from a book called Buddhist scriptures, but it wasn't really scripture. We'll read a scripture before the exam, that rhinoceros horn scripture. But even that, we mostly read narrative literature. Those are slightly different. So in any case, he's chanting, right? He's saying prayers is another way to think about it. He's hitting this instrument in sort of a very rhythmic way, right? And that's usually how people say prayers. Actually, saying prayers is a big part of Buddhism. And maybe it shows my limitations, but it's not a big part of this class. We'll see more of this in the second part. Okay, so here's this robot doing these funeral ceremonies. One thing I want you to think about is how does this robot compare to a monk, and what's same, what's different? So let's watch a little bit more. So here,
16年前からですね、葬儀産業にもですね、参入したことがありまして、ペッパーが、言葉を覚えることがとても得意なものですから、仏教、お経の方を。
このような立ち位置、ものの考え方になっていただけたらな、という願いがあります。これにて法案を終わらせていただきます。偶則人寸力、今週地本弁、実本。
This computer is kind of struggling, but it seems like it's still making it. So here's what I want you to talk about. How should Buddhists respond to death? So this final chapter is all about death. Spoiler alert, the Buddha dies, right? And there are a lot of conversations about death, ways to think about it. It's not like at the front of the chapter. It's mostly just like what happened when the Buddha died. But this is what I want you to think about, is what is sort of like the Buddhist take on death, right? You could say in sort of a pop Christian culture, you think about heaven, you think about seeing all your loved ones and friends. Buddhists don't really have that idea, right? So what's the Buddhist take on death? How should we approach it? How would a monk approach death versus like a lay person? Is that going to be the same thing? And we haven't talked about monks very much yet, monks and nuns. But let's just say someone who takes these Four Noble Truths very seriously. If you took the Four Noble Truths seriously, how would you think about death, right? What does the Four Noble Truths say about death? And then finally, if you thought the robot was cool, is he enlightened? how does he compare to one of these monks we were just talking about, someone who takes the Four Noble Truths seriously? So very simply put, we're going to talk about death, but all these other subsequent conversations are also good. Maybe I'll even just drop this in the chat if you'd like. Oh, right, because it's not going to work. I got to highlight it. As you can tell, I'm very uncomfortable using this computer instead of my computer. That should work. All right, so do you guys have questions for me? I'm recording. Okay, so I guess we can dim the lights. So it was a pretty general conversation. You could have taken it into the book. You could have talked about robots. You could have talked about lots of stuff. What did you guys talk about? I wasn't able to join any group, so I have no reflections to provide. Anything anyone want to share? Chat, you guys been quiet today. Anybody in the chat? What did you guys talk about in the chat? Please. Oh, I might have just muted you. Go ahead.
I can start if you want.
I don't even know whose voice that is.
Cameron?
Go ahead. Cameron, yeah, there you go. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
So, no, it's okay. Our group kind of started on how Buddhists view death as like a part of their cycle. So they die and then they come back and the cycle keeps on going. And they also see it as if they were a good person while they lived, then they shouldn't be scared to be reincarnated because they'll be rewarded with a good next life. And we were talking about the difference in other religions, such as like Catholicism, whereas when someone dies, we see them as reuniting with their creator, but it's more of a sad thing because we don't understand like what it means to be reunited with God, you know, on that kind of basis. And we don't really have any like writings about it in a way, you know, whereas Buddhists say that, oh, we'll be reincarnated and this is how you go about your karma and stuff. I think Catholicism is much more broad in the sense of what it means to reunite with God.
Yeah, well, I think that maybe what you're getting at is these details about heaven and how all dogs go to heaven and that sort of thing are sort of a later development. Yeah, so I think that part's true. There's a lot written on death, though. Let's not be confused about that, right? So for the past 2,000 years, people have been dying, and during those 2,000 years, Christians have been rarely concerned about what happens during death. And in fact, a lot of the things you described, I know we were sort of pointing at the Buddhists, could also be true for Christians, right? Is there a Christian belief that, you know, if you do good works, well, let's see, what's the Puritan thing, where like there is a certain chosen group, right? And it's not reliant upon doing good works, but if you do good works, then it's sort of a representation of that you are one of the chosen ones. And if you are one of the chosen ones, then you have nothing to worry about when you die. Is that a familiar idea? I think it's specific to Puritans, but in any case, I agree with Cameron up to a certain point. I think there's definitely some similarities, some differences. And I set up a little bit of a trap for you guys in the sense that I gave you these Four Noble Truths. I showed you this robot. Do you think the robot is ever sad when people die? Did anybody compare robots to monks? Did anybody get there? What do you guys say about robots and monks, Bria?
We were just saying that with a monk, they're very passionate about like Buddhism as a religion and as a way of thinking about death. And then with the robot, they kind of lack that empathy and kind of understanding about death and that cycle of rebirth. Where they're more just like harmonizing or saying these rituals.
Yeah. So one thing I should have made more clear than I did is this was like kind of a show. It was like an experiment, you know, like a technology show. This was not a real funeral or anything like that. I don't think Pepper has ever done any funerals, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I mean, he looks like he's in sort of a ceremonial setting here. So I could be wrong about that. But my guess is nobody has used him. I would be surprised if somebody did, but who knows? There are people who are into that sort of stuff. Okay, yeah, other general thoughts? Anybody else want to share? I think there's a lot to go on from here.
I think I kind of thought about like how we were talking about the nihilism stuff, like if we're all made of the same stuff, and like it's almost like what does it matter if it's the robot saying this or like an actual person?
So from maybe a nihilistic perspective, then it all is kind of the same stuff, right? Robot voice, human voice, it's all just words. Who cares what you attach to them? That's true. One thing, again, I did set you guys up for a trap. This is not the Buddhist view, right? So one thing I want to emphasize, Buddhists are not nihilists. In fact, they often point to nihilism as a problem, right? If you go too far in this direction, you become a nihilist. Sydney, you had a hand up? What were you thinking about?
Yeah, we were just saying like using kind of pepper as a monk, but he much like we didn't go through a lot of like the stages of like Buddhism besides being like besides doing this funeral ritual. So for some people it might seem like off because then you haven't like experienced Buddhism like as a religion.
That's a good point. He doesn't have much training, does he? Right. I asked sort of an offhand question: is Pepper enlightened? What do you think? Is a robot enlightened? It's sort of a weird question, and I think, you know, building from what Sydney just said, she made me think of it. The answer would be no, right? He lacks the training. He lacks the vow. Remember the vow from this book? What was the vow all about? Primordial vow the Buddha made before he came down to earth. He looked down on all the beings and their coronaviruses and their shots and their masks and stuff. And what did he say? He wants to liberate all beings from suffering, right? And of course, Pepper is not able to do that. But one thing that we could say about Pepper, do you think Pepper suffers? Do robots suffer? Probably not. We have a thought. Chad, what do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. I think that robots can be programmed to feel, but I don't think that they can actually feel emotions, because like the reason like we feel emotions because we have a brain. So robots don't have that. You can program them to like react in certain ways and respond in certain ways, but they can't really feel real emotions, if you know what I mean. It's not like they can't really feel human emotions. They can be, like I said, they can be programmed to like react to certain situations and to respond to a variety of different situations, but I don't think that they can actually feel like real like emotions.
Interesting. So I like the way that you're going here, because Ellie is thinking, you know, what are we composed of as humans? What makes us humans versus robots? And in fact, this is something we talked about a little while ago, right? What are humans made out of? We have a form. Does Pepper have a form? He does, yeah. We have sense perceptions where we can sense the world around us. Can Pepper sense the world around him in some limited capacity? Yeah, cameras, right? And audio sensory. I don't know how good it is, but some limited version of that. Is Pepper able to add kind of qualifications to those senses and say, this is a human, that's the sound of a human's voice, this is a command? Yes, right? That's how Pepper's able to communicate. So we're checking 3 boxes so far. We're doing pretty good. Mental formations and consciousness, I think those are the big ones. So I liked what Ellie was thinking with emotions and that sort of thing. If we use Buddhist language, maybe consciousness is what's missing. The ghost in the shell, right? There's sort of a sci-fi conversation about that. Is, can there be consciousness in a robot? And I think the answer we must say is no. So before we go, we have 4 minutes. Again, I set up a trap for you. Let's talk about some art, as we like to do in this class. Can you see what's going on in this art here? So this is an old depiction of the Buddha at his time of death. I guess this is as dark as it gets. It's, as you can see, it's sort of, it's a little unclear. It's very old. It's like 2,000 years old. It's from Gandhara. It's that area, northwest Pakistan, that shares characteristics in their art with Greek culture. I'm kind of fascinated by them. That's why I'm providing this here. Can you tell what's going on here? The Buddha's in the middle. He's lying on his right side. If you ever see the Buddha lying down, it is this moment. It is him passing away. It's a very common depiction of the Buddha, particularly in Southeast Asia. There's some giant statues of what people call the reclining Buddha, which is a very polite way of saying the dying Buddha. What's everybody else doing there? They seem upset, right? Why do you say they seem upset?
Visually, they look distressed.
Their hands are in the air. They're probably not like celebrating, right? They're probably not like waving them like they just don't care kind of thing, right? Maybe they're tearing their hair out, right? This guy's got his hands on his head. They sort of all have their hands on their head. They're grieving. 100%. Anytime the Buddha dies, grief is like the dominant emotion. And so this is something, again, I set up a trap for you, and forgive me for being so mean about this. You read all this Buddhist philosophy and you begin to think, oh, they're just like robots, right? They don't suffer, they don't see suffering in the world, they've overcome all these attachments, they have no desires. But of course, wanting the Buddha to live longer, is that an unwholesome desire? That's a very wholesome desire. You want the Buddha to stick around. That'd be like wanting me to stick around so I can teach you more. You wanting this class to be a little bit longer so we can keep talking about this stuff. You guys share in those sorts of desires? No, maybe not. But that's what's happening here, right? These are deeply depressed, distraught, disturbed people. They are sad, deeply sad. That's what this whole chapter is about, is saying goodbye. Right? And it's not only just Ananda, who you don't have to know Ananda. He's actually a very famous disciple of the Buddha, but I'm not going to force you to know him. I got to draw the line somewhere. It's not only Ananda. Who's the other one who's saying goodbye? His son. Oh, it's heartbreaking, right? He goes to the Buddha. The Buddha's like, don't be sad. But does he expect him not to be sad? Of course not, right? This is a sad moment. This is a sad moment for even very advanced meditators like Ananda. For even the Buddha's son, right, of this very sort of noble lineage, everybody is super sad. Now, at the same time, there are also tools to deal with the sadness. And I think this is the important part, is just because you have tools to deal with sadness doesn't mean you will not be sad. It can be both, right? If we go too far in this nihilistic direction and have no feelings anymore, that is not the Buddhist path, right? The Buddhist path is this middle way. And so you feel sadness when you are a Buddhist. Don't be mistaken. Buddhists are sad. Monks are sad. Monks are sad to say goodbye to each other. There's love, there's friendship, there's attachment even, right? Maybe from a very kind of precise point of view, you might see that as a negative thing. But I think loving feelings between two human beings, even if it's a temporary relationship, is a good thing. And to be sad when it's gone is what we could call a natural thing, right? And so we see all this language of don't be sad, this sort of thing. There's a lot of details to talk about. We can pick them up next time. This will be much quicker. I think the philosophical stuff takes more time to go through. But this is the Buddha's final words. And it's really what we've been talking about this whole time. Everything is impermanent. I know you guys are all sad that I'm dying, but everything is impermanent. Let me remind you. I know you forgot, but let me remind you, right, that all things are impermanent. They are suffering. This religion of enlightenment, which speaks of bliss, speaks of liberation from the pain of impermanence and suffering of compounded things, is only gained through vigilance. Please, you must make effort to be vigilant. Monks, this is my final teaching to you. So this is the end of the movie. The great sage is dying, and here are his final teachings. So we'll pick up with these next time. But there are two parts to it, right? Everything's impermanent. Be vigilant. Maybe that's what we can start with next time. What does it mean to be vigilant? Okay. Any questions before we call it a day? Hopefully the different technology wasn't too disturbing for you all. I think we made it work. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.